talk about some of today's top stories, showing you this live look that we have there at the White House. Big news coming today from our nation's capital. President Trump says that there will be a 25% tariff on imported cars. This is now
the quietest country in the world just flipped the global economy upside down without firing a single shot. Ottawa, behind closed doors and out of the media spotlight, a single signature changed the future of the North American economy. Canada, the world's second largest country by land but rarely by influence, enacted a new set of mineral export restrictions, specifically targeting rare earth elements critical for electric vehicles: lithium, nickel, and cobalt. These weren't broad sanctions or sweeping gestures. They were surgical, quiet, and devastatingly effective. With a single stroke, the lifeline of the American clean energy push, Tesla's sprawling gigafactories, Ford's EV ambitions, GM's electrified roadmap, was choked. The result? Tesla's lithium supply chain hit a wall. Ford's factories stalled due to missing battery components. The Biden administration's green energy goals, already ambitious, were suddenly hostage to its northern neighbor. This wasn't just trade friction, it was precision economic warfare. Elon Musk built his empire on the edge of efficiency. His just-in-time supply chains had no room for error. Materials were supposed to arrive exactly when needed. No earlier, no later. That was the magic and the risk. So when Canada began halting shipments for compliance checks, it was more than a delay, it was a disaster. First, nickel shipments were frozen at the border. Canadian officials cited environmental irregularities. Then, lithium trucks were redirected for surprise inspections. Aluminum smelters, quietly emboldened by the new policy, raised prices overnight. Tesla's procurement teams scrambled. They tried to reroute orders from Australia. They begged South American partners. They even considered working with China, despite the political optics. But global supply chains don't turn on a dime. At the US-Canada border, shipments began to crawl. Trucks carrying vital auto components were held for random inspections, some for over 24 hours. Customs agents requested new documentation, flagged minor spelling errors, rejected perfectly valid forms. Trains carrying batteries and chassis were mysteriously rerouted or delayed due to weather, even when skies were clear. Detroit's assembly lines, already working with razor-thin margins, couldn't keep up. A single late shipment meant 1,000 cars unbuilt. Line workers were sent home. Plants missed their monthly quotas. Suppliers fumed. It became clear this wasn't mismanagement, it was a message. Then came the real blow, open and unapologetic. The Canadian government announced a 100% tariff on Tesla vehicles entering the country. At the same time, it rolled out a generous $10,000 subsidy for electric vehicles built on Canadian soil. The signal was crystal clear. Canada would reward loyalty to its economy and punish reliance on outsiders, even allies. Almost overnight, the tables turned. Ford and GM, long considered American giants, suddenly found themselves courted by Ottawa. Their Canadian branches became the stars of the show. Volkswagen, sensing the shift, accelerated construction on its Ontario EV plant. Tesla locked out. Its price points in Canada became laughably uncompetitive. Canadian consumers turned away. Dealerships stopped taking orders. At the center of it all stood one man, Prime Minister Mark Carney, former central banker, economist, chess player, not a politician in the traditional sense, but something more dangerous, a strategist with patience. While America's political machine tore itself apart on cable news and social media, Carney quietly redrew the map. He flew to Tokyo, then Seoul. In quiet backroom meetings, he promised reliability, minerals, and stability. Japan and South Korea began shifting their supply chains north toward Canada. In Europe, he offered Germany something the US could no longer guarantee: predictable partnerships. German automakers moved operations to the Netherlands and signed long-term deals with Canadian mines. In Latin America, he offered respect, not charity. Chile and Brazil, rich in lithium and rare earths, inked export deals with Ottawa, cutting the US out entirely. It became known as the Carney Doctrine, trade fairness, climate leverage, silent dominance. Canada was no longer a quiet neighbor. It was now the gatekeeper to the green future. And then, without ceremony, came the death blow. Battery factories began popping up like mushrooms along the Quebec-Ontario corridor. State-of-the-art, government-backed, and fully integrated with Asian and European partners. Meanwhile, Canadian ports opened direct routes to Mexican auto hubs. These bypassed American infrastructure completely. Japanese firms, Mazda, Toyota, Honda, invested billions into the new pipeline. America was no longer the center of the continent's industrial universe. In fact, it wasn't even on the map. Mexico and Canada, historically America's junior partners, had built a supply chain that didn't need Washington's approval, funding, or even participation. Inside the United States, the cracks began to show. President Trump, back in office with promises to revive American steel, faced a harsh truth. There were no active mines, no skilled labor pipeline, no infrastructure to match Canadian output. His executive orders sat like paperweights while factories shuttered. In the Rust Belt, the backlash was swift. Laid-off workers stood in front of empty plants, filming TikToks with their MAGA hats in hand, asking the one question the administration couldn't answer. "Where's my job, Mr. President?" And then came the energy crisis. With tensions mounting, Canada reviewed its oil exports to the U.S. Overnight, gasoline prices skyrocketed. The Midwest experienced rolling blackouts. The national conversation shifted from EVs to survival. Canada never raised its voice, but America was on its knees. As the dust began to settle and the smoke of disruption cleared, new power players emerged, not with invasions or ultimatums, but with contracts, blueprints, and factory keys. Japan and South Korea, longtime allies of the West but never ones to pick fights, quietly moved in. Their auto giants, Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, and Kia, had watched the chaos unfold from across the Pacific with calculating precision. Now, they saw opportunity. U.S. auto factories, once bustling symbols of American industrial might, stood eerily silent. Assembly lines froze mid-production. Empty parking lots stretched for miles. These weren't just closed buildings, they were tombstones. But Japan and South Korea didn't just buy property, they brought discipline, efficiency, respect. In places like Ohio and Michigan, where unemployment lines had returned, something strange happened. Korean engineers arrived, not to outsource, but to rebuild. Japanese managers walked the factory floor, not barking orders, but bowing to workers. They restructured systems, retrained American labor, and restarted the heartbeat of manufacturing, not under the stars and stripes, but under new banners of Asian discipline and North American integration. And American consumers? They noticed. The cars coming out of these resurrected factories were durable, affordable, dependable. They didn't make wild promises, they didn't crash updates, they just worked. And in a time of instability, that was enough to earn loyalty. If a vehicle was built in Mexico, it could enter the U.S. tariff-free, regardless of who owned the factory. So that's exactly what they did. The aftermath across the United States, a quiet decay began to spread. Car dealerships, once the backbone of local economies, started vanishing. The giant inflatable gorillas were deflated. Neon lights were turned off. Rows of unsold vehicles collected dust. Spare parts became scarce. A simple battery replacement that once cost $200 now cost $900 if it was even in stock. Repair bills tripled. Mechanics who once thrived were now scavengers, hunting online auctions for rare parts. Some customers waited months for basic maintenance. Others simply gave up. Owning a car, once a rite of passage in America, was now a privilege. For many middle-class families, especially in rural areas, the math no longer made sense. They sold their trucks, they carpooled, they walked. Cities saw a boom in electric scooters and bicycles. Suburbs slowly died. The legendary American road trip, the soul-searching highway adventure immortalized in books, movies, and music, became just that, a legend. Gas stations closed, motels emptied, small towns withered. This wasn't just a recession, it wasn't even a depression. It was a slow, undeniable unraveling of the American way of life, one spark plug at a time. So, what happens now? Can America rise from this? Can it rebuild what was lost? Or will the EV revolution, the supply chains, the innovation, and the jobs now belong permanently to Canada, China, and the rest of the world? Or maybe the world didn't steal the future, maybe it just stopped waiting. Subscribe for the next crisis before it hits.